The emergency sirens screamed through every corridor of Research Station Nova 7, a floating city in deep space where scientists from across the galaxy studied the universe's most dangerous mysteries. Red lights flashed as automated voices warned everyone to evacuate immediately. People were running, some flying, others slithering depending on what species they were, all heading toward the escape shuttles as fast as they could move. Dr. Rebecca Torres stood frozen in front of her laboratory's observation window, watching something that filled her with equal parts wonder and absolute terror. For 20 years, she'd been the galaxy's leading expert on a dormant egg, a perfectly preserved relic from a species everyone hoped had gone extinct. The egg was massive, nearly 6 feet tall, with scales that seemed to drink in the light around it. Ancient texts called the creature inside a void dragon, and every civilization in the galaxy had the same advice about them written in their oldest warnings: run and don't look back. Rebecca had dedicated her entire career to studying this egg, taking readings, running scans, writing papers that other scientists read with morbid fascination. The egg had been dormant for over 3,000 years. Everyone assumed it would stay that way forever, a beautiful but dead piece of history. They were catastrophically wrong. The hatching started 6 hours ago with a single crack that sounded like a gunshot echoing through the containment chamber. Within minutes, the crack spread like lightning across the surface. Then came the sounds, a rhythmic tapping from inside that made everyone in the lab stop what they were doing and stare. Something was alive in there, and it wanted out. When the shell finally broke open, what emerged was simultaneously magnificent and terrifying. The hatchling was small, about the size of a house cat, but every instinct Rebecca had developed over decades of working with dangerous creatures told her this was the most lethal thing she'd ever seen. Its scales were pure obsidian black, so dark they seemed to create shadows around them even in the bright laboratory lights. When it opened its eyes for the first time, they glowed like molten gold, ancient and aware in a way that made Rebecca's skin crawl. The creature didn't act like a confused newborn. It acted like a weapon that had just been activated. The moment it took its first breath, it exhaled a mist that hissed when it hit the containment field, causing the energy barrier to flicker and spark. The smell of burning electronics filled the air. Within seconds, 3 of Rebecca's colleagues collapsed, clutching their heads and screaming. The station's medical team would later discover they'd suffered severe psychological trauma, their minds assaulted by waves of pure, concentrated rage emanating from the hatchling's psychic presence. The void dragon, even as a newborn, was doing exactly what the ancient texts warned about. It was a creature of pure predatory instinct, viewing everything around it as either prey or a threat to be eliminated. When security personnel burst into the lab wearing protective gear, the hatchling opened its mouth and spat a stream of liquid that melted through their energy shields like they were made of paper. The floor where the acid landed bubbled and hissed, creating a crater of molten metal. Station Commander Williams made the call everyone knew was coming. Full evacuation, no exceptions. Every person on Nova 7 had exactly 2 hours to get to an escape shuttle before the station's self-destruct sequence would activate. Nobody argued. You didn't argue when a void dragon was loose, even a baby one. The galaxy had learned that lesson the hard way centuries ago. But here's the thing about space stations, they're not just research facilities. They're communities. Nova 7 had been home to over 3,000 beings from dozens of different species for years. People raised families there, had birthday parties, fell in love, lived normal lives between the groundbreaking scientific discoveries. In the residential section, far from the panic of the laboratories, a human family was having a very different kind of morning. Michael Peterson was an astrophysicist, the kind of guy who could explain black holes in ways that made sense to normal people. His wife Jennifer studied alien plant life, trying to figure out which species from across the galaxy might help solve Earth's food production problems. They'd moved to Nova 7 6 months ago for the opportunity of a lifetime, bringing their 6-year-old daughter Lily with them. Lily had adapted to space station life better than either of them, making friends with alien kids whose biology textbooks would say shouldn't even be able to communicate with humans, let alone play tag with them. When the evacuation alarms started blaring, Michael and Jennifer did what any parents would do. They grabbed their emergency bags, already packed according to station protocols, and went looking for their daughter. She'd been in the community recreation area, playing some kind of game that involved floating magnetic balls and a lot of laughing. But when they got there, Lily was gone. The recreation supervisor, a friendly being named Kevin whose species had too many tentacles to count quickly, said he'd seen Lily head toward the main corridors about 10 minutes ago. She'd heard some of the older kids talking about a baby dragon and wanted to see it. Kevin had assumed she was going back to find her parents to ask permission. Michael felt his heart drop into his stomach. Jennifer grabbed his arm hard enough to hurt. Their 6-year-old daughter, curious and fearless in the way only young children can be, was wandering toward the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy. And in the chaos of the evacuation, with thousands of panicking beings flooding the corridors, finding one small human girl was going to be nearly impossible. Lily Peterson had never been the kind of kid who listened when adults told her to stay put during emergencies. Not because she was bad or trying to cause trouble, but because her 6-year-old brain worked differently than grown-up brains. Where adults saw danger and thought about safety protocols, Lily saw adventure and got curious. When she heard the older kids whispering excitedly about a real live baby dragon that had hatched in the research labs, every other thought in her head just disappeared. She had to see it. The corridors were absolute chaos. Beings of every shape and size rushed past her, carrying bags and children and precious belongings. Some were crying, others were shouting in languages that her translation earpiece couldn't keep up with. A few adults noticed her walking alone and called out, asking where her parents were, but Lily just smiled and said she was meeting them up ahead. It was technically a lie, but also she figured she'd find them eventually after she saw the dragon. How long could it take? She followed the sounds of the commotion, the blaring alarms, and the flashing emergency lights deeper into the station's restricted areas. Her small size turned out to be an advantage because while adults were shoving and pushing to get through doorways, Lily could slip between them like water flowing around rocks. She crawled under a security checkpoint barrier that had been abandoned when the guards evacuated their post. After about 15 minutes of wandering and taking wrong turns, she found what she was looking for. Cargo Bay 3 had been converted into an emergency containment zone. Security Chief Ryan Carter stood behind a hastily assembled barricade made of cargo containers and reinforced blast panels. He had 12 armed personnel with him, every single one pointing some kind of weapon at a corner of the bay. The air smelled wrong, like burning plastic mixed with something acidic that made Lily's nose wrinkle. Scorch marks covered the walls in black streaks, and 2 security drones lay on the floor looking like someone had poured hot metal over them. In the corner, pressed against the wall and surrounded by what looked like a semicircle of pure hostility, was the dragon. Lily's first thought was that it wasn't nearly as big as she'd imagined. The creature was maybe 2 feet long from nose to tail, with wings folded tight against its body. But even at 6 years old, even without any training in xenobiology or predator behavior, Lily could feel the danger radiating off it like heat from a fire. This was something that could hurt you badly if it wanted to. The dragon's scales were the blackest black she'd ever seen, darker than space itself when you looked out the observation windows at night. They seemed to shimmer with little flickers of red and orange underneath, like there was actual fire burning just below the surface. Its eyes glowed bright gold, and even from across the bay, Lily could see they were filled with hate and fear in equal measure. The creature was hissing, a sound that made her teeth hurt, and every few seconds it would spit something at the security team that sizzled when it hit their energy shields. Ryan Carter was talking into his communicator, his voice tight with stress. Lily heard him say something about authorization to terminate the threat, about how they couldn't risk it getting loose in the main station, about how every second they waited was a second closer to catastrophe. His hand was on some kind of trigger device, and Lily understood with the strange clarity that sometimes comes to children that he was about to kill the dragon. She didn't think about what happened next. Thinking would have stopped her. She just acted. Lily walked right past the barricade, ignoring Ryan's startled shout of her name. Someone tried to grab her, but she was already past them, her little legs moving fast across the open floor of the cargo bay. The security team went completely silent, everyone frozen in shock at the sight of a human child walking straight toward a creature that had sent trained warriors running in fear. The dragon noticed her immediately. Its head snapped around, those golden eyes locking onto her with an intensity that should have been terrifying. Lily felt something push against her mind, like an invisible hand pressing on her forehead, and somewhere in the back of her thoughts she understood this was the psychic assault that had hospitalized 3 researchers. But to Lily, it just felt like the dragon was trying to tell her something, trying to say it was scared and angry and didn't understand what was happening. She got within 5 feet of it, close enough to see that its scales weren't perfectly smooth but had tiny ridges like a lizard she'd once held at a zoo on Earth. Close enough to see that its claws, wicked sharp and digging gouges into the metal floor, were actually trembling slightly. Close enough to realize that this terrifying monster everyone was so afraid of was actually just a baby, alone and frightened in a world full of things trying to hurt it. Lily broke into the biggest smile and said the words that would echo through galactic history, words that would be quoted in academic papers and government hearings and documentary films for decades to come. Words that would fundamentally change how every species in the known universe thought about humans and their bizarre relationship with danger. She said them with the pure, unfiltered enthusiasm that only a 6-year-old encountering something amazing could muster. "Oh my gosh, you're so cute." The dragon stopped hissing. The psychic pressure that had been battering everyone's minds like ocean waves crashing against rocks just stopped. Completely. Instantly. Ryan Carter, who'd been gritting his teeth against the mental assault for the past 20 minutes, nearly fell over from the sudden absence of it. The silence in the cargo bay was so complete you could hear the humming of the station's life support systems. Lily reached out one small hand, the way you might approach a scared puppy, and touched the dragon's head right between its eyes. The creature's scales were warm, almost hot, but not burning. They felt smooth and hard like polished stone. For a moment, nothing happened. The dragon stared at her, its golden eyes wide and unblinking. Then, impossibly, incredibly, defying every law of xenobiology and predator behavior ever documented, the dragon made a sound. It purred. Deep and rumbly like a cat but with an undertone of something much more powerful, like distant thunder or an engine idling. The dragon leaned into Lily's touch, its eyes half closing in what could only be described as contentment. Its tail, which had been lashing back and forth aggressively, now curled loosely around itself. The hostility, the rage, the pure predatory menace that had filled the cargo bay like poison gas just moments before evaporated like it had never existed. Lily scratched behind where she thought the dragon's ears might be, if dragons had ears, and the purring got louder. She turned around to look at all the shocked adults staring at her with their mouths hanging open and asked the question that would launch 1,000 diplomatic crises. Her voice was cheerful and completely innocent, the voice of a child asking for something she wanted more than anything in the world. "Can I keep him? Please? I promise I'll take good care of him. I'll feed him and walk him and teach him not to melt things. I'm gonna name him Smokey because of the smoke stuff he breathes. Please?" The standoff lasted exactly 3 days, and those 3 days changed everything. The Galactic Council, a governing body representing over 200 species across 70 star systems, held an emergency session that went on for 16 hours straight. They dealt with wars, plagues, dimensional rifts, and cosmic threats of every imaginable variety, but they'd never dealt with anything quite like this. A human child had befriended a void dragon. The words didn't even make sense together. It was like saying someone had taught a black hole to fetch or convinced entropy to run backwards. The Council's official position was clear and unanimous. The creature must be terminated immediately, regardless of the child's attachment. Void dragons were classified as extinction-level threats, right up there with sentient supernovas and reality-eating parasites from dark space. There were no exceptions, no second chances, no room for sentiment. Every member world had lost someone to these creatures over the centuries. The fear ran deep, carved into cultural memory like scars that never fully healed. But here's what the Council didn't fully understand about humans, and what they were about to learn the hard way. When a human, especially a human child, decides something is theirs to protect, getting between them and that thing is about as smart as sticking your hand in a furnace. Lily Peterson barricaded herself in her family's quarters with Smokey, and she made it absolutely clear through the locked door that nobody was taking her friend away. Not now, not ever. Michael and Jennifer were stuck in an impossible situation that no parenting book had ever prepared them for. On one hand, their daughter was locked in a room with a creature that could theoretically kill her in about 6 different horrifying ways. On the other hand, they'd spent the first day watching through the security cameras as Lily taught Smokey to play fetch with a reinforced titanium ball that weighed more than she did. The dragon would retrieve it, occasionally melting it a little bit by accident, then drop it at her feet and wait for her to throw it again with his tail wagging. Dragons apparently had tails that wagged when they were happy. Nobody had known that because nobody had ever seen a happy dragon before. Dr. Rebecca Torres became completely obsessed with documenting everything. She set up monitoring equipment outside the Peterson quarters and recorded every interaction. What she saw defied explanation using conventional xenobiology. Smokey followed Lily everywhere, his golden eyes tracking her movements with devoted attention. When she sat down to color, he curled up next to her, resting his head on his front legs and watching her work. When she got frustrated with a difficult picture, he made soft chirping sounds that seemed to comfort her. At night, he slept curled around her bed like a protective guardian, his body temperature carefully regulated so he kept her warm without burning anything. Rebecca spent 18 hours reviewing centuries of research data, looking for any precedent, any clue that could explain what was happening. What she found was a pattern that nobody had ever connected before because nobody had bothered looking. Humans were weird. Not weird in the usual ways that made other species uncomfortable, like their disturbing number of teeth or their unsettling preference for persistence hunting. Weird in a much more fundamental way. Earth was a Class 9 death world, a planet so absurdly dangerous that most species couldn't survive there for more than a few hours without serious protective equipment. Everything on Earth had evolved to be tougher, meaner, and more adaptable than it had any right to be. But humans hadn't just survived by being strong or fast or venomous. They'd survived by making friends with things that should have eaten them. Archaeological records showed they domesticated wolves, turning apex predators into loyal companions over thousands of years. They'd convinced wildcats to live with them. They kept snakes and spiders as pets. There were documented cases of humans befriending bears, raising lions, teaching octopuses to solve puzzles for fun. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. Humans had evolved an almost supernatural ability to form bonds across species barriers. They could read emotions in faces that didn't work like human faces. They projected empathy toward creatures that had no evolutionary reason to understand empathy. Most importantly, human children seemed to be hardwired to see potential friendship in absolutely everything. Those big eyes? Adorable. Those sharp claws? Cute little murder mittens. That acidic venom that melted steel? Just teething problems, nothing to worry about. On day 2 of the standoff, the Galactic Council sent a diplomatic delegation to Nova 7 to resolve the situation by force if necessary. They arrived in an official cruiser, wearing their formal robes and carrying documents that authorized them to do whatever was necessary to neutralize the threat. The delegation was led by High Chancellor Ixtera, a distinguished member of the Prismian species who'd served on the council for 40 years and had a reputation for being unmoved by emotional appeals. Lily met them at the door to her family's quarters. Smokey, who'd grown noticeably in just 2 days and was now the size of a medium dog, sat perched on her shoulder like the world's most dangerous parrot. His tail wrapped loosely around her waist for balance, and he watched the delegation with eyes that glowed with intelligent awareness. When Chancellor Ixtera began to speak, explaining in careful diplomatic language why the dragon needed to be removed for everyone's safety, Lily's eyes filled with tears. That's when something remarkable happened. Smokey responded to her distress, but not with violence or aggression. He nuzzled his head against her cheek, making soft cooing sounds that seemed designed specifically to comfort her. The psychic resonance between them was so strong that every empath in the delegation gasped simultaneously. They could feel it, a bond of pure unconditional love flowing between species, between predator and prey, between monster and child. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The delegation retreated without accomplishing their mission. Chancellor Ixtera filed a report that used words like unprecedented and potentially revolutionary and requires further study. Dr. Torres saw her opening and took it. She submitted a formal proposal to the council with a simple premise. Let the human keep the dragon under strict scientific observation. Study this bond. Learn from it. Because if humans could befriend a void dragon, what else might they be capable of domesticating? What other impossible bridges might they be able to build? The council agreed to a probationary period of 30 days. They had no idea they just opened a door that would never close again. Within hours of the decision becoming public, every human in the galaxy who had access to Galactic News Network saw the footage of Lily and Smokey. And their collective response was immediate and predictable. If that little girl could have a dragon, why couldn't they have cool alien pets too? The applications started flooding in before the week was out. A teenager named Jake Williams on Mars Colony submitted paperwork to adopt something called a gel devourer, a slime creature that dissolved organic matter on contact. He'd found one in a containment facility and spent 3 days sitting outside its tank, talking to it, showing it pictures, offering it food. The creature, which had been scheduled for termination, now responded to its name, GUI, and had learned to play digital games using a specially designed interface that responded to its gelatinous movements. The phenomenon spread across human colonies like wildfire, and nothing the Galactic Council did could slow it down. Within 2 weeks of Lily's story going public, there were over 40,000 applications from humans requesting permission to adopt creatures that had been classified as dangerous, impossible to domesticate, or outright extinction-level threats. The applications came from every demographic imaginable, from teenagers in basement apartments to retired military veterans to grandmothers who'd spent their whole lives working normal jobs and suddenly decided they wanted a pet that could tear holes in reality. On Europa Station, a orbital facility orbiting Jupiter's moon, a woman named Betty Harris became something of a legend. Betty was 63 years old, had worked as a school teacher for 40 years, and had recently retired to space to be closer to her daughter's family. She'd always loved animals back on Earth, keeping cats and dogs and even a rescue parrot that learned to swear in 3 languages. When she heard about the human domestication phenomenon, She marched down to the station's xenobiology containment wing and asked what they had available. What they had was a Shadow Ripper, a creature that existed partially out of phase with normal reality and had been responsible for evacuating 3 different stations over the past decade. It appeared as a vaguely humanoid mass of living darkness that could slip through walls, cause electronics to malfunction just by being near them, and induce severe paranoia in anyone who spent too long in its presence. The containment team was planning to jettison it into Jupiter's atmosphere the following week. Betty took one look at the creature cowering in its reinforced cell and said it looked lonely. The containment team thought she was insane. Betty brought the Shadow Ripper a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies, set them just inside the containment field, and sat down on the floor outside to knit while humming old songs from her childhood. She did this every day for a week. On day 8, the Shadow Ripper cautiously reached out with a tendril of darkness and took a cookie. On day 12, it was helping her untangle yarn. By day 20, station security footage showed Betty and her Shadow Ripper, which she'd named Whisper, working together in the station's community garden, with Whisper using its reality-phasing abilities to help water plants in hard-to-reach places. The pattern repeated itself across human space with stunning consistency. A construction worker named Danny Rodriguez in the asteroid belt befriended a magma worm, a creature that lived in molten rock and could grow up to 30 feet long. Danny had been working on a mining operation when they accidentally drilled into a dormant worm's nest. Instead of evacuating like protocol demanded, Danny grabbed a heat-resistant suit and a case of his favorite barbecue sauce and went to investigate. 3 days later, the magma worm, now named Sparky, was helping the mining operation by boring through rock more efficiently than their industrial equipment, and Danny fed it mineral supplements mixed with barbecue sauce because apparently Sparky liked the tangy flavor. Dr. Rebecca Torres documented every case she could find, and the data was staggering. The success rate for human-creature bonding was hovering around 92%, which shouldn't have been possible. These weren't domesticated animals with thousands of years of selective breeding. These were apex predators, cosmic horrors, and things that made seasoned warriors wake up screaming. Yet humans approached them with snacks, kind words, and a stubborn refusal to accept that friendship wasn't possible. The key, Rebecca discovered, was something she started calling aggressive affection. Humans didn't just tolerate dangerous creatures or cautiously respect them from a distance. They aggressively loved them. They'd walk up to something with more teeth than seemed physically possible and say things like, "Who's a good murder machine? You are. Yes, you are." They'd hand-knit sweaters for creatures that existed partially in alternate dimensions. They'd learn alien biochemistry just to figure out what treats their new friends would enjoy most. Back on Nova 7, Lily's bond with Smokey had become the gold standard that everyone pointed to. The dragon had grown significantly over the past 6 weeks, now roughly the size of a horse, but his devotion to Lily had only intensified. She taught him an impressive array of tricks and behaviors. Smokey understood sit, stay, don't melt that, and gentle, which he demonstrated by carefully picking up raw eggs in his mouth without breaking them. He'd learned to retract his claws during hugs and to regulate his body temperature so precisely he could keep Lily warm on cold days without singeing her clothes. More importantly, Rebecca's research revealed something that made the Galactic Council very nervous. Smokey's capacity for violence hadn't disappeared or been suppressed. It had been redirected and refined. He was protective of Lily with an intensity that bordered on terrifying, and he demonstrated several times that he could distinguish between actual threats and harmless strangers with remarkable accuracy. The test came during a scheduled security drill that went wrong. A malfunction in the station's defensive grid triggered a real lockdown, and a section of the exterior hull breached, causing decompression alerts in several sectors. In the chaos, a piece of debris came loose and went flying through the residential corridors at lethal velocity, heading straight toward where Lily was playing with her friends. Smokey moved faster than the security cameras could properly track. One moment he was lying peacefully in a sunny spot by the window. The next, he was airborne, his wings snapping open with a sound like thunder. He intercepted the debris mid-flight, his claws catching it and his body twisting to absorb the impact. The debris, a chunk of reinforced titanium weighing over 200 pounds, crumpled in his grip like aluminum foil. He landed between Lily and the corridor where the debris had come from, wings spread wide in a protective stance, his eyes scanning for additional threats. The whole incident lasted maybe 4 seconds. Lily hadn't even had time to feel scared before it was over. She just walked up to Smokey, hugged his leg because that was as high as she could reach now, and said thank you. The dragon carefully folded his wings, lowered his head to receive pets, and the rumbling purr that emanated from his chest was so loud it vibrated the floor panels. The security footage went viral immediately. Not just on human networks this time, but across the entire galactic communication grid. Species that had considered void dragons to be mindless killing machines watched the playback over and over, trying to reconcile what they were seeing with everything they thought they knew. The debate in the Galactic Council chambers became heated. Some members argued this proved humans were dangerous, that they were creating super predators bonded to them personally, essentially weaponizing creatures that should be extinct. Other members, particularly those who'd spent time around humans and were starting to understand them better, argued something completely different. Ambassador David Foster, one of the first humans elected to the council, gave a speech that got quoted in every major publication across known space. He stood at the podium with his own bonded creature, a storm eater named Zeus that crackled with barely contained electricity, and explained what everyone was missing. Humans weren't creating weapons. They were creating family. These creatures weren't being controlled or dominated or forced into submission. They were being loved, genuinely and unconditionally, often for the first time in their entire existence. And love, it turned out, was a more powerful motivator than fear ever could be. The council voted, and the result changed galactic law forever. The Human Companion Protocol was officially recognized, establishing frameworks and guidelines for humans to bond with previously designated threat species. There would be training requirements, safety protocols, and oversight, but the fundamental principle was established. If a human could prove they were capable of forming a genuine bond with a creature, they would be allowed to try. 2 years had passed since the incident on Nova 7, and Earth had become the unlikely center of an interstellar revolution that nobody saw coming. The planet that had once been considered a backwater curiosity, notable mainly for producing a species that ate fermented foods and thought skydiving was fun, had transformed into the beating heart of something much bigger. Humans had proven they could befriend the unfriendable, and now the whole galaxy wanted to understand how. Lily Peterson was 9 years old now, and if you'd told her younger self that having a dragon would become normal, she would have laughed. But that's exactly what happened. Smokey had grown into something magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, now roughly the size of a commercial aircraft. His wingspan stretched over 100 feet when fully extended, his scales had darkened to an impossible shade of black that seemed to absorb light itself, and when he flew overhead he cast shadows that could cover entire city blocks. Yet despite his massive size and obvious power, he remained as gentle with Lily as the day she first called him cute. The Peterson family had returned to Earth 18 months ago, settling in a rural area of Colorado where there was space for a dragon to live comfortably. The backyard, if you could still call it that, had been expanded to cover nearly 40 acres. Most of it was reinforced with heat-resistant materials, fire suppression systems hidden discreetly in the landscape, and a specially constructed shelter where Smokey could sleep when the weather turned bad. Though more often than not, he preferred to sleep under the stars with Lily's bedroom window open so he could hear if she needed him during the night. Life had developed a comfortable rhythm. Every morning, Smokey would fly Lily to school, a sight that had caused absolute pandemonium for the first few weeks until everyone got used to it. Now, parents waved from their cars as a dragon the size of a house descended into the designated drop-off area with a 9-year-old girl riding on his back like it was the most natural thing in the world. Lily's classmates thought she had the coolest ride to school in human history, and they weren't wrong. Some of them were jealous, but most were just excited to have a friend with a dragon, especially on show-and-tell days when Smokey would demonstrate tricks for the entire class from the football field. But Lily and Smokey weren't unique anymore. Earth's landscape had changed dramatically as the Human Companion Protocol spread. Drive through any major city and you might see a teenager walking something that looked like a floating jellyfish made of lightning, carefully keeping it away from power lines. Visit the countryside and you'd find ranchers working alongside creatures that the galaxy had classified as megafauna threats, now helping herd cattle and protect livestock from regular Earth predators that suddenly seemed a lot less impressive. The oceans hosted humans swimming with bioluminescent leviathans that had once sunk ships for entertainment, now playing fetch with submarines and helping clean up pollution because their human friends asked nicely. The adoption protocols were strict, Rebecca Torres had made sure of that. You couldn't just decide you wanted a cosmic horror as a roommate and expect approval. There were training courses that lasted months, psychological evaluations to ensure you understood the responsibility, and practical examinations where you had to demonstrate you could actually handle the species you wanted to bond with. The failure rate was about 30%, which was actually lower than most people expected. Turns out, humans who genuinely wanted to befriend dangerous creatures were usually the exact kind of people who could pull it off. Animal sanctuaries had expanded to include sections for what were officially called extraterrestrial companions, though everyone just called them weird pets. These facilities housed creatures whose humans had passed away or who needed temporary care while their bonded humans dealt with life situations. The staff was specially trained, mostly humans who'd successfully bonded with multiple species and understood the nuances of interspecies communication. Walking through one of these sanctuaries was like stepping into a science fiction fever dream. You'd see someone bottle feeding something with too many mouths while casually chatting with a coworker about dinner plans, completely unfazed by the fact that their charge could theoretically digest diamonds. Lily's 10th birthday party became a minor diplomatic event, though she didn't really understand why. Her parents had invited her school friends, some neighbors, and family members. They hadn't expected Ambassador Torres to show up with a delegation from the Galactic Council, including 3 members who'd voted against allowing Smokey to live in the first place and had since changed their positions entirely. The backyard was packed with kids, most of them human but a few alien children whose families had moved to Earth specifically because it was the only place in the galaxy where their own unusual pets were welcomed. Smokey had positioned himself in the center of the yard, lying flat so his back formed a natural slide for the smaller children. Kids climbed up his tail, which he held steady like a ramp, then slid down his wing to land in a foam pit that Michael had set up for safety. Smokey's purring was so loud you could feel it in your bones, a deep rumbling that sounded like happiness given physical form. One of the alien children, a young being whose species didn't have a name that translated well into English, approached nervously. Their culture considered dragons to be essentially demons, mythological creatures of pure destruction. But watching Lily's complete lack of fear, seeing how carefully Smokey moved to avoid accidentally stepping on anyone, the child reached out one tentative appendage and touched Smokey's side. The dragon turned his massive head, golden eyes focusing on the child with surprising gentleness, and made a soft chirping sound that clearly meant hello. The child's parents, watching from a safe distance, looked like they might faint, but their kid was already climbing up to take a turn on the dragon's slide. Ambassador Torres stood next to Michael and Jennifer, watching the scene with multiple eyes that gleamed with something like satisfaction. She'd spent the past 2 years documenting the human domestication phenomenon, and her research had become the most cited work in modern xenobiology. She'd proven what many suspected but few believed. Humans possessed a unique combination of traits that made them almost supernaturally good at forming interspecies bonds. High empathy that let them read emotions across biological barriers. Fearlessness bordering on recklessness that let them approach creatures others fled from. And perhaps most importantly, an optimism that refused to accept that friendship was impossible. You know what's interesting? Torres said, speaking to Jennifer while keeping her eyes on the children playing. I've been studying bonding patterns across hundreds of human pairs now, and there's something I keep seeing. The creatures don't just love their humans. They understand them in ways that shouldn't be possible. Smokey knows when Lily is sad before she cries. He knows when she's getting sick before symptoms show. That storm eater that Ambassador Foster bonded with can predict his human seizures 30 minutes before they happen. We're not just talking about domestication here. We're talking about connections that transcend normal biological communication. Jennifer nodded, watching her daughter laugh as she raced her friends up Smokey's tail. Lily talks to him all the time. Not just commands or training words. She tells him about her day, her worries, her dreams. And I swear he understands every word. Maybe not the vocabulary, but the meaning behind it. As the sun began setting over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the party wound down. Most of the guests had left, though a few lingered to watch what had become Lily's favorite part of any day. She climbed onto Smokey's back, settling into the spot between his shoulder blades where his scales formed a natural seat that seemed designed specifically for her. With a running start and a powerful thrust of wings that sent dust and leaves swirling, Smokey launched into the air. They flew together as they'd done countless times before, Smokey keeping his speed moderate so Lily could enjoy the view without being frightened. From the ground, they looked like something out of ancient mythology, a girl and her dragon silhouetted against the dying light. But there was nothing mythological about it. This was real, happening right now, a testament to what became possible when humans decided that making friends was more important than giving in to fear. As they soared over forests and lakes, Lily leaned forward and hugged Smokey's neck, feeling the warmth of his scales and the steady rhythm of his breathing. You know what, Smokey, she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. Everyone thought you were scary, but I always knew you just needed someone to see how special you are. The dragon's response wasn't words because dragons don't speak, but the emotion that pulsed through their bond was unmistakable. Home is where you are. Family is what you choose. And love makes everything possible.